Hello and welcome to another episode of the Grow My Salon Business Podcast. I'm your host, Anthony Whitaker, and as always, it's great to have you here with us today. And whether you're watching on YouTube or listening as you walk the dog or are driving the car or running on the treadmill or whatever it is you're doing, I just want to start by saying thank you for being a listener. At the end of every year, it's always a good time, I think, to recap and reflect on the previous 12 months. And you might choose to do that at a personal or at a salon level, but you can also look at what's happening on an industry-wide basis. And you can ask yourself what worked during last year and what are the current business trends in the industry? Where are the opportunities for the year ahead? And on today's episode, I'm going to be talking with my good friend and returning guest, Gordon Miller, who, amongst many other things, is a fellow podcast creator. He's an AI enthusiast and somewhat of an expert. And he's also someone who not only cares deeply about the industry, but he is also someone who has worked across many different areas of the industry. And as a result, he has developed a very well-informed and somewhat unique overview of the hairdressing industry. So in today's podcast, amongst other things, we're going to discuss the changes happening in the hairdressing industry. We're going to talk about the continued integration of AI into everything we do and the evolving relationship between salons and manufacturers and lots more. So without further ado, welcome to the show, my friend Gordon Miller.
Anthony, I'm in Mexico, as you know. We talk, but I'll say it to your audience. I'm in Mexico, and I'm very happy.
Good. Half your luck. I always look forward to this catch up and this end of the year sort of state of the nation with you, because you're so, well connected. You have such a good overview of the industry at lots of different levels. You've pretty much had every job you could have in the hairdressing industry, except being a hairdresser.
And except working for a big brand. I purposely stayed out of the brand lane.
Yeah, true. Okay. So I wanted to kick off by asking you, what have you seen in 2025 that are the, let's say, two biggest changes aside from AI? What are the two biggest changes that can be challenges or not that you've seen in the industry during 2025?
I'm going to start with one that I think kind of covers much of the industry, but I think individually we may not even recognize it as a trend per se, because it's just kind of like AI, but in a more real sense. This is just a focus or conversations on pieces of information that I feel is beginning to envelop the industry, and the things we talk about matter. And this has really been a really big year of focus and conversations, kind of beginning at certain parts of the industry, perhaps kind of high up in the stratosphere of big companies and brands, but working its way down rather quickly. And that is data, the idea of the numbers, the math. And I think especially, in the post-COVID world, I mean, we've always talked about numbers, but I think more than ever, people are asking, where do those numbers come from? What do those numbers mean? I hear this, but what does it really mean? And I love that, number one. I don't think it's anywhere near the point where it's going to be transformative for the industry, but it is at a place I think it will transform more businesses than we've seen ever in the past, that we can connect the dots between truly understanding what the P&L means, what the KPIs in the systems. And, it's kind of the evolution of technology in our industry. And, as it's moved along and we've identified more clearly to everybody, well, these are the numbers of all the numbers you could look at. These are the ones that really matter. And now we're starting to see, well, what are some best practices? What are some actionable things I can do with those numbers, And so, that would be numero uno,
Okay.
It's pretty big,
What's driving that? Is it the economy? I mean, you and I, as we were saying before I pushed the record button, we both started in the industry a very long time ago, and we've seen lots of different changes. One of the things that I would make as an observation is that when I started in the industry in the late 70s, people were successful despite themselves. And we live in a very different, economic reality now because of all the tech, computerization and everything else that's happening. And then, of course, we've also got the pressure on the economy at the moment. So in your understanding of it, is that something that's driving it, that the margins are getting smaller and smaller, and so people are starting to go, right, I need to really pay attention here.
I think for some, I think that's absolutely true. I think, I think both the millennial and Gen Z generation, and in every generation, there's different types of people. We tend to kind of paint everybody as the same. And I think those who kind of have an entrepreneurial sense within them, it's kind of born to be an entrepreneur, if you will. I think they're very curious. And I think, there's not been a lot of conversation like the ones I'm beginning to see. And I think they're just drawn to it. I think they're curious. So many people, when you talk about Gen Z as an example, I hear in the industry, a lot of like, they don't want to work very much, or, they want to do other things. Like, and it's so hard to get to motivate them. And I was having this conversation yesterday with somebody who said that to me, and a smart person. I said, my take's so completely different. I said, yeah, there's always been people like that. I mean, there are people who, don't want to do very much in my generation a million years ago. I said, I think that this is a generation that's very sensitive to a lot of things. I think that's a good thing. And especially sensitive to their use of time. And they're not very interested in working 40 hours to do 23 hours of work. I think, if they can't get to a point quickly to see how they're going to fill up the time that they're committing to the work, and especially if the compensation only relates to the number of hours they got a client in front of them, eventually they're just going to say, hey, I've been at this for a while, and this is the number. I work in a salon who's marketing and helping put clients in my chair. I'm working to do my part of that. And so I think there's a lot of that. I think there's a sensitivity to information for some that will be and has been, I think, for a small number, and it's a growing number, that'll be transformative. And I think the institutions of the industry, the big companies, the big distributors, PBA, I think as we march forward and spend more time looking at the data, asking smart questions, I think we'll be better to understand everybody. And I don't think we've ever really understood everybody who works in the industry. And understand consumers. So I just feel like the data is the magic decoder ring of everything. But you have to understand it. You have to know where it came from. You have to have proper context, which we still lack in a lot of it. You have to be curious and ask the right questions. Sometimes ask the questions that don't seem to make sense on the surface, but sometimes the data, it's like, the scientists, who live in their test tubes and everything. And, there was the story of the guy, I think it was a 3M company, or, they make adhesives. And he made some mistakes. And the next thing he did was he made the Post-it. And it didn't stick the way it was supposed to stick. And he had to, after he screwed up, he had to start asking questions of like, well, actually, maybe you can't do something with this. And I believe it was a friend who saw it, who was just kind of like, I would love to have that. Like, that thing that's not glued. Put a note on it. It became one of the biggest innovations of its day and made gazillions of dollars. So sometimes it's like taking a step back and looking at things differently. And I think the data allows us to do that. So I have high expectations over the next 3 to 5 years that we're going to start to have some ahas that can maybe help us all be better at what we do.
Yeah. Okay. Well, there's a straight line from there into the next question, which I was trying to hold off about, which was to talk about AI, because ChatGPT exploded onto the scene, 3 years ago? About 3 years ago now?
And beginning of 2023.
Yeah, and you have been a disciple, a fanatic, or whatever. I forget. I did read somewhere the number of events that you'd done, the number of talks that you'd done on AI.
Over 20.
Over 20. Yeah, you're really treading the boards out there. So you know a lot about it, and I know you're talking to a lot of hairdressers about it, a lot of salon owners about it, and I've heard you talk on your podcast how quick the uptake has been from when you first started talking about AI. There'd be 2 or 3 people in the room put their hand up, and now it's 95% of the people are putting their hand up that they've at least tried it and are starting to understand it. So talk to us about the impact of AI in the industry. I suppose the first question to ask you is, how are salons using it?
Yeah, and there's been no studies on it. No, I recently I did a talk at Intercoiffure at their fall atelier in New York. We didn't talk about it. I'll announce it here on a podcast since it's coming out next week. For those who don't know, part of my resume is the beginning of a new part of my career, and that's as the general manager of Intercoiffure. One of I think, the most important salon association in America, perhaps the only salon association at this point in America. And that's a whole different conversation. I'm really excited about that. But I've been speaking at their events for years. I know the membership really well. I know the leadership. I'm really excited about their vision for, how to make this association, which I think is really important, even more important. And in those conversations, this last presentation I did, I wanted to present use cases from the membership. So, they heard me 4 times previously. So who's doing what? And the leadership reached out and identified 3 really important salons who were using AI literally in every single part of their business. Like, I interviewed them, they showed me what they were doing. Almost everyone could say, well, this is the most important thing. Sam Ricardo, who I'm fascinated always with his take on anything happening in the industry, he's as obsessed as I am, but he's in the salon every day. So he's using it as all kinds of tools, but he's most importantly using it, I think, as a teaching and training tool for his junior stylists to get them to understand all the products and do so in a way that's very tailored and personalized to them. He's built these agents, which is a very kind of advanced term if you're just new to AI, but these are real things that are usable today, and it's mind-blowing what he's accomplished. His general manager, Jenna, she has an AI agent that she uses as her personal professional assistant. And she said to me, she's like, I feel like, we are growing our team with these tools, literally our team, with no added cost. And she said, think about the ability to grow your team, to have administrative help, to have an assistant to get things done for you, to look at your email, look at my email and prioritize it. Tell me, hey, you need to look at this email now. The rest of the emails can wait. But this email, which was the 5th one in line, is an email from a client who needs some help. And have the ability to the AI to be, as a real assistant would be, working with you all the time. Then there's Brandon Wagner, salon owner down in Florida. He literally, and I have all this use case information of how he uses it in his education department. He developed an artistic director with the help of AI to create the job description, but one that's appropriate for his salon and also the times that we live in. Uses it for financial analysis, uses it for all of the social media content. And his social media videos are just killer. And so, again, every part of his business. And then the last one, I featured it in Coiffure, was from Gadabout Salons, which in America, Gadabout is an iconic, very high-end salon and spa based in Arizona. I think they have 8 locations, over 100 team members. And they use Google's suite of products, like many salons do. They have Gmail, and they use the documents, they use Sheets, and they do all that sort of stuff. And now they're using Gemini, and they're using it because it's so integrated into all the other stuff, right? And so every salon is using Gemini AI to help them with their email, to help them with scheduling, because it also their calendar, all that stuff. But most importantly, they were struggling. They identified their biggest challenge as an organization, and that was communication between management and the team members who were of a younger age. Because you had a lot of Gen X managers, they've been there for a while, and you have a lot of Gen Z and millennial team members. And they do, I think, monthly one-on-ones, I believe, and which is a great thing to do, coaching, feedback, listening, getting feedback from the team members. But Frank Westerbeck, one of the co-owners, he's like, that communication is hard. It's a generational thing. You have to shift your language up, perhaps, and there's nobody to coach us. They built through their AI basically a way for all the management team to pre-engage in AI with advice about every team member and how best to communicate whatever it was they were trying to do. And 90+% of the communications have, by their measurements, improved in quality. And that measurement comes from the team members who say, this process of the one-on-ones is more positive for me. I got really great stuff out of it. And my manager is having more effective communication with me. And on the management side, they're saying those communications are more effective. The goals they were given are more clear, and we're moving faster to the goals.
What did they feed in to the AI? did they feed in the generation that these people are from, or did they do like a disc profiling or something on different individuals, personality profiling, so that they could say, this person is that, how am I best to talk to them about such and such? What did they actually do?
My understanding is, and Gadabout, might be a great follow-up guest for you, but what they've done, as I understand it, is go through the process that they normally go through. They do not, get AI scripts. They do not have the AI do the coaching. They basically do something I kind of do in different ways for certain things, which is to be like, hey, here's who I am. Here's what I do. Here's the process that we use. Here's the forms that we use. Look at our forms. So we are very organized. We are very prepared. We do not go into our one-on-ones without being thoughtful. We look at performance. We're looking at the last month's performance. We're looking at the goals that have been agreed to between myself and my team member. We're looking perhaps at the last performance review. What were the highlights? What were the most important parts of it? Are there any challenges, from the last time? As I get ready to do my new review, because if I didn't have AI, if I'm a good, coach to my team, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to make some notes about what I know about my team member. I've been watching, since last time we said, you're missing an opportunity on retail. You're a little bit below where everybody else is. It's important to our business. More important, it's important to our clients. And that, leads to satisfaction, which is good for you, the stylist. And so we can see that's not quite there. I'm going to make those notes for me. I'm going to figure out how I'm going to talk to that. And then there's a stopping point. All of that gets dumped into the AI. So I'm basically sharing everything I've shared with myself to prepare myself. Now I'm going to go to my AI coach and say, here's all of it. Here's what I am hoping to encourage this person to do. It's not the AI making a decision on what's the next thing you want to encourage that person to go to. So the AI absorbs everything and says, you're Gen X. Here's how you look at things. They're Gen Z. Here's how they intake things that they hear from various people. And here's a way to think about how you communicate everything you've told us about and be more effective in reaching that person.
Interesting. There's a link here between what we were talking about before with when you said that data is one of the big changes. And I'm wondering what the connection is between the fact that we've now got AI and data, because we've always had a certain amount of data, but not necessarily knowing what to do with it. And I know I had Sam on the podcast, Sam Bricato, who you mentioned before, I don't know, a couple of years ago. It was the very early stages of AI. And he was already talking about uploading P&Ls and stuff into it. And I was like, and spreadsheets. And I was like, I've missed the boat here already, because he was so ahead of the curve. So so that was interesting. So I suppose that's what I'm asking you about now is the tech side of the industry. But when you talk about the point of sale systems, all the people that have got, tech in the industry, whether it's, salon software management or color management software, how are they using AI? How are they sort of experimenting with it and integrating it into the industry? What are you seeing there?
Well, I've said since the early talks on AI, to me, listening to the larger world and what all of our expectations will be, it's a guy named Andrew Ng, who's a thought leader in AI, professor, genius guy. And he's like, AI is going to be like electricity. It's going to be like electricity. It's going to be everywhere. It's going to be ubiquitous. It's everywhere. And we're moving towards that very quickly. In the beauty industry, it is going to be everywhere. First and foremost, the one thing that kind of is everywhere is beauty technology to help us run our businesses, to help us run our books, our booking systems, marketing that we do, this, very tech-based, tech-driven today, how websites get built, the POS systems, the payment platforms, that's all tech. They've got AI already in all of it, social media's, filled and has for decades, had algorithms underneath it. So, I've long said from stage, it's like, hey, I just want to make you aware of how important this is and is going to be in the industry. And whether you jump on the bandwagon now or not, I feel like we're still somewhat in early days. But it's going to be in everything, And so in other words, your POS system will have it. You'll have new features in your POS about how you get your reports. And you'll be able to get the benefit of those reports and maybe insights you never could get before by way of the AI, but you don't need to understand the AI or even care about the AI to get the value of the AI. And again, it's like we think about electricity. Most of us don't think about electricity ever until all the lights go out. If one light goes out, we don't even think about electricity. We're like, okay, that's a light bulb. If all the light goes out, which for most of us is a very rare occasion, very, very, very rare, we don't think about electricity. Maybe if you got a new baby in the house, yeah, you think about electricity because that's the one time you start thinking about what can someone stick in the wall that could cause a problem. Yeah. So in our industry, it's quickly getting everywhere. I mean, you look at Vish, which is a tech company, but also utilizes scales, right? And I know they're all obsessed about AI and how it works. I don't know how exactly it works within what they do, but if it was only allowing them as a service provider to make what comes out of the scale more interesting and better to understand and more usable and save you more money, blah, 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 to supercharge that scale with AI. If it hasn't happened, it's coming. It's
exactly.
Just coming. So you're not going to be able to escape it. And I think that's okay. I think that's a wonderful thing. And not knowing what it is not that different than not knowing what electricity is. You get the benefit of the electricity, turn on the light switch, yay. You get the benefit of the data coming out of the scale and sliced and diced in better ways. And I also think, I haven't heard tech companies talk about this. I think the tech companies will soon be allowing you to look at the information they provide you and through the tools they give you, be able to have it more aligned with who you are as a user. Meaning if you're a creative people, that the information will be presented to you in a way that creative people can really understand.
Okay. One of the things that's been happening is this constantly evolving business model. And, it's really gained traction everywhere now. Like it's not just an American thing. Everywhere there's a lot more independence. There's a lot more freelance. There's a lot more self-employed, whatever the terminology we're going to give to it. And I'm curious to see what your thoughts are, what you're noticing as to how that's evolving. I know we've spoken about it before, and you've said that you still think there's a long way to run in terms of that. But it's interesting. I've had some. I know you listen to some of my podcasts. Thank you.
I listen to them all.
Well, good. Thank you. And likewise to yours. I had Coco Wagner on. Did you listen to that one the other week? Okay, so
I didn't. It's on my list. It's on my list.
Okay. Well,
first of all, I'm such a huge fan of Jute. And
me too.
Know David and have met Coco personally, I think 2 or 3 times now, and I'm really excited about the future of their organization with her.
Me too. And I look at businesses like Jute and like Van Michael as being the sort of vanguard, the standard bearer of this is a great commission salon. This is how you do it. Like par excellence, you know what I mean? No matter where you are in the world, this is how you do it. And there was a couple of things that she shared on the podcast that really, made me, it gave me a lot of confidence in that the commission model isn't going anywhere. And she was talking about, and I've got the numbers in front of me, she said they have 64% of their team earning 6-figure plus incomes. 64%. Yeah. That is huge. I mean, that's phenomenal. I was listening to Prof G, and he was brilliant. He was absolutely brilliant. I think it was him, and he was saying that the average income in the US is just shy of 80,000 a year, and that's actually the first time I've heard it said as high as 80,000. Now, I'm not talking about hairdressing industry. I'm talking about average income in the US, just shy of 80,000. So when you're talking about hairdressers, 64% of people in one salon organization earning a 6-figure plus income, that's huge when the average or mean income is just shy of 80,000. Now, the really interesting bit was she also said that their average people or their average stylist is working a 27-hour week. So you're working a 27-hour week and you're making over 100 grand a year. I mean, there's not going to be many salon suite owners or people that are self-employed that are able to do that sort of thing. And as she was saying to me on the podcast, they have a lot of people that come back to them. So they leave to go out and do the self-employed thing. And they even have a name for them. They call them boomerangs. And they come back because they want the security. They want the holiday pay. They want the someone else to deal with the clients and call them up if they're ill, and someone else to look after inventory, etc., etc. And I thought that was really interesting that they really see a strength in their business model, whereas a lot of other salon owners just see what they've got as being something that is being eroded by everyone wanting to go freelance. So are you seeing more of that? Like, what are your observations of that? You're not. Right. Okay. So
but here's what I would say was really important, so really important. So Jute salons, like Van Council, they live in a very rarefied part of our industry. They're the best of the best, top salons doing, I believe last I'd heard, Van Michael salons were $25 million operations, multiple locations, but not a huge number of locations. They have a business in Japan as well. Jute salons, I don't remember the math, but it's astounding. When you hear the numbers, you're like, whoa. And, so I think there's, a couple of things that have to be considered. And I always think this is one of the failings of the industry. And that's why I am so excited about so much data becoming available to us. So you can start with the price points. Like my brain goes to, okay, what do I do with this information? If I'm listening to that podcast and I listen to her making what I think are brilliant and really important points that everybody should pay attention to. And you go like, okay, so they're working 27 hours a week and they're making all this money. So if I was coaching a friend hairdressers who's like, how do I do that? Well, I'd be like, well, let's look at those 27 hours and break everything down. How much per hour is this person actually working and making, in that 27? Because that, if you want to be like that person, well, that needs to be one of your goals. Then you need to take that information and that data point, if you will, and put it in the context of where you currently work. So that person is making, I'm totally making up a number. I have no idea what the number is. Is making $500 an hour on services. Again, the math is pretend. And I'm going, okay, well, they're probably at a 45% commission or something like that. So that means you got to bring in $1,000 an hour on your tickets. It's an exaggerated number. Again, I don't know what the reality of the math is, but you kind of have to do that math because it's so critical to understand that the income potential that you have, in the current business you're in, is everything. It's so important to all the rest of the math. And that is often dependent on a whole lot of things. The business itself and how good they are at what they do and how they think about it. But also understanding that, if you build a luxury salon and it has all the right price points and all the right people and all the right training and all the right culture, and then you put it geographically in the middle of an area that is poverty stricken, that it's just the wrong decision that, we're going to go in this giant pretend geographic area that is very difficult for anybody who is of means to come into just because of the lack of transportation, making stuff up. The math will never work. It can't work because they're not there. Or if you build it on an island, and there's only so many people. And so there's a lot of things that have to go into that conversation. And then we also have to remember as a business that we kind of have levels in every industry. Food's the easiest to think about. We have the Michelin restaurants. They are a rarefied, unique group of restaurants. There's a great book that I was Googling, called Unhospitality. It's fantastic.
Yeah,
in our industry, everybody should read Unhospitality because they talk about what does it take, and it's not the food, it's the customer experience. And we always talk about that important. It isn't. I think it's everything. Why would somebody like me be even remotely willing to pay, let's say, $200 for a haircut? I'm not willing to do that. It would have to be the experience that gets me there. Because there's so many great hairdressers doing men's hair for $45 and $55 and $65 and $70. When you're just going to get above $100, what's the difference? So I think, what they have achieved includes putting themselves in locations where the demographics of the clients who are their base, the everyday base of their business, are of a certain means and have a certain perception about quality, that you don't find in every single geographic area that one can live in. I lived until recently into a really big city of Chicago. I understood very well which neighborhoods where all the money was, and almost always really successful salons were in those neighborhoods or adjacent to those neighborhoods. I lived in a very diverse kind of middle, a little bit of upper middle class, a little bit of lower middle class neighborhood. I love the diversity, every bit of it. there were no luxury salons in my neighborhood. There just weren't. It didn't make sense for them to be there unless they were very aspirational and taking a leap and hoping that one day they would be able to do the kind of things that a David Wagner is doing within geographic areas. And there's so much more to that story, but yeah, that's how I think about it. And I think aspirational role models, but then you got to do the math. You know, it's like, you want to be Mariah Carey? That's a big swing, you know, but you sing, you want to make a career out of it? Let's try to figure out that math and find out where's that middle ground that perhaps you can have a life that you love and do the craft of singing that you love, you know how to get there. But if you start with, I want to be Mariah Carey, you know, I want to be Vidal Sassoon. I loved your podcast on the Van Michael Salons, that one, what was her name? I loved her so much.
Yeah, I knew you were going to say that.
She's such a good guest.
Yeah.
You just look for one of Anthony's episodes, you know, about Van Michael Salon, owned by Van Council. I mean, she just does everything right, and she makes in her pocket over $400,000 a year before taxes. That is brilliant. I think she's a masterclass. Everybody go listen to that. Put that
She was great. So we've been talking about data, we've been talking about AI and your sort of insights into salons. And I mentioned then that they were doing 27-hour weeks, a lot of these people. What is the data saying now about the industry and the amount of hours the average person is working? Because 27 hours is a part-time job. I wish I could work 27 hours.
Right. 24 hours is the latest stat that we've seen coming through PBA. And that data, I think, is a couple years old because it takes time to collect that kind of information. But yeah, we're looking at about a 24-hour week on average for the industry. Again, that's a data point. That's an average of everybody.
24.
I would say to anybody,
right. Wow.
24. And I would say to anybody listening, you know, that I think it's smart if you're working and you have a lot of excess time on your hand and you've been smart about figuring out everything you can to utilize that time better in terms of earning money, and it just doesn't work. I get why some people will say, I'm just going to work less because I just can't do it. Maybe I'm in a salon where that population, that neighborhood I'm in, I just can't make it work. And so I support that kind of decision, you know, if it's been done very thoughtfully. What I would also say is when we slice and dice the industry and look at who's being successful, it's really, really tough. And the difference between 24 and 27 is not much, but those salons are really unique, you know, in what they're doing. I think smart hairdressers today, I think, have gotten pretty good at doing the math of what they want to earn, the kind of business they're working in, the price points of those who come into that business, and figuring out, you know, based on how much time I spend working and being smart about how I bring in referrals, and I'm that stylist who is willing to, you know, pre-book people and upsell people, and then doing the math just to figure out to get to my goal of making X number of dollars a year so I can feed myself, feed my family, live the life I want to live. It's a math equation. It's just a math equation. And, you know, versus I'm going to accept that I can't do any better and adjust my hours down, you know, and I think we have a mix of both those things happening. We've always been an industry with a lot of part-time people because we've always have been a predominantly female industry. And I love the fact that we're the rare industry that professional women get to make decisions about how they live their lives, especially if they are, you know, folks who want to have families and have the flexibility. And I think women are more likely to be caregivers of aging parents. And so I love that part. And that's been around since the beginning of my time in the industry over 40 years ago. I think we're more part-time than ever. That bothers me. It feels less professional in many of the kind of buckets that I see. When I see, you know, 22-year-olds working 24 hours a week, you know, that makes me sad because I think you got to get in there and kind of give it your everything. And if you can't build your business when you're a new professional, then put more time into getting educated and count that as time on the job somehow, some way, even if you're just doing it on your own. Don't forget why you came in. This is such a big message to everybody. It's like, don't give up on your dreams. Like if you came here to make a good living, figure it out, because you and I know a lot of people over many, many years under all kinds of different pressures that have come to the industry over the many years. We've seen these transitions, but we know so many people who figured out how to make it. And they weren't unicorns, you know, but you got to do the work, and we all do the work at different speeds, at different paces, but you got to do the work. And I still, with great confidence, say to most people, you come in, you learn what you ought to learn. You're willing to, I hate to say pay your dues. People say that. I just mean to put the time in. You can get there. Most people can get there, but you got to do the work.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned Maxwell Snow, who worked for Van Council, and it was episode 267. And she only works a 4-day week, and she makes sure she has Saturdays off, because she likes football. She loves sport. Exactly. Yeah. So it's but she grafts when she's in there. So I think she does a 4-day week, but she still does. And I'm not sure now. I think it was 40 hours a week or whatever. So she works 4 days. She works hard. 4 10-hour days, but she makes. She's in the top 3 or 4% of income earners in the US, period, earning that sort of money. I mean, that's phenomenal.
And so she's a happy person, and she feels like she does have balance in life, and she does have the personal and the professional going on. I mean, and that's the other thing I feel like the word hustle has gotten a bad name in our industry. Yeah. And I would only say to anybody listening that, you don't get to become successful in this industry if you hustle. You have to work 40 hours to hustle? No. You can, if you're working 24 hours, find a way to do your version of the hustle within the 24 hours. You'll be better off. 27, exactly. 30, but whatever it is, hustle.
Yeah. All right. Last couple of things I wanted to ask you about was the changing relationship between the professional salon industry, meaning salon owners, and product manufacturers. Because I mean, again, when we started in the industry, there was a real sort of love-in between the professional manufacturers and salon owners, a very tight relationship. And it seems to be, sort of since COVID. I think COVID was a bit of a turning point. Maybe it was happening anyway, but I think it really amplified or speeded up the process. That the relationship between manufacturers and salons is not what it used to be, in terms of education and support and all that sort of stuff. And maybe that is love. Yes. And that's sort of a result of what you were talking about before when you said like retail sales, for example, are down 7 or 8%, which is a big drop. That's a lot of money you're talking about there. But as this move to salon suites happens and more individuals, and more of those individuals are not bothering with the retail thing, those manufacturers have still got to get their product to market. And this all happens to just all coincide with, Amazon and the internet and distribution through multiple different channels. And sort of the casualty on it, and no one seems to talk about it, is the relationship between the professional product companies and the salons isn't what it was. And I thought it was a really important relationship, and I still do think it is. So I'm just sort of wondering what your observations are about that now.
Yeah. So as the infrastructure, all the stuff the industry sits on top of, as that landscape changes, the relationships that people are able to have changes. I grew up in a fairly small town in New Jersey, and as a family, at 5 years old, my mother could send me to the butcher. Most listeners couldn't tell you where a butcher is in their communities today, but and I could go to the butcher, and the butcher knew me by name, the little 5-year-old, and he knew exactly what my mother wanted. And not only did he know that she wanted a roast, but he knew the kind of roast and how much fat and how lean and not lean. That was a different era. Gary Vaynerchuk talks about it as the thank you economy, where everybody knew everybody. And that was small town America in a certain era. And then as the country grew and things got more complicated, and I'll use myself as an example later in life, moving to a city like Chicago, it's a very rare place, other than my coffee shop that I go to on a very regular basis. I'm in there enough where I get to know people over time. But it's a very rare place just because of the shift from a small town economy that was much of America to a more large city or town or suburb, where the opportunity for business to know us, and they had to scale because of what happened in business. Walmart comes in, drives a whole lot of stuff out. In the industry, consolidation came in. When you and I were young in the industry, Redken was an independent company. Matrix was an independent company. Kerastase, I believe, was an independent company. And so as those things evolve, as local family distributors who were ruling America in the early days of my career, as they began to absorb other distributors and take over regions, and then Salon Centric is born by L'Oreal, and it takes over a whole lot of these family businesses. It's kind of the equivalent of living in this giant big city in a personal life where you just don't have the same kind of opportunities to know your salesperson, to know your brands in a way that just feels a lot more human. And so you and I have participated in all these big brand events for years and years and years. And coming out of COVID, most of those brand events went away. The way that we knew that we had a gap, we had like a 3-year period where we didn't have those events where we came together and got to know people, including the brand people. But that had already started to fall apart pre-COVID.
Yeah.
Somewhat from the attendees. Distribution went from, some of the best salons in America were created in the 90s because that distribution model was so different. And they had what were called DSCs, your distributor sales consultant. And they were the people who came in and introduced you to new products and said, oh, I got this new thing called Paul Mitchell, and here's what it is, and here's why it matters to you. And I'm going to teach you how to sell it. And I'm going to teach you how to market yourself. And I go visit other salons, and there's a best practice that you're not using. I see it in others, and you'll be better for it. And education happened in a different way. Those conversations created a bond that was elevated to loyalty to the brand. The brands got sophisticated, then they bring the traveling circus to town, and of all their educators and the fancy stuff and the gift bags. And again, in a different era where hairdressers went, I love this. I love this brand. They feel like me. I get the vibe. I feel like I'm part of the tribe. Mm-hmm. And then over time, we started to see the Redken tribe versus the Paul Mitchell tribe versus the Matrix tribe, where they swung their towels around their head. I mean, there were aspects of each of those tribes that made them very, very different. Mm-hmm. And there's many more examples of that. And then fast forward, 30 years almost, and that looks completely different. And so even like, where is the opportunity to go be a part of that, which makes you tighter to the brand, especially when so much is happening online now. I'm looking at the beauty shows for this year. They're not what they were. I'm looking at one of the really big beauty shows this year, and I'm like, there's no big brands. Like there's none. There's very little I saw that I was like, I can't figure out why I would go to that show unless I need to buy scissors. Mm-hmm. So things are just changing so much. It doesn't make them bad. They're just different. And I believe, I mentioned at the beginning, I know we're going to wrap up soon. I mentioned at the beginning, I have now become the general manager of Intercoiffure. I've had this wonderful career. I spent most of my career in the education space. I then went into the publishing space, American Salon, Hairbrained, big community. And now I'm coming back to an association. It's the association of the big salons, the $1 million plus salons. They do all kinds of amazing stuff there. And part of my reason for wanting to be part of this, I believe we are entering an era for the industry where salons collectively are going to come back together in ways that they were already doing in the 1970s and 80s, which was to say, if nobody else is going to educate us, we're going to educate ourselves.
Yeah.
But we are going to organize in such a way where that can happen. We're going to create platforms. And today it'll be different because they will go to brands, say, help us do this. And I believe brands will do that. There's an opportunity, I think, to take the best of the best salons who are doing things right, back to David Wagner and Jute, and say, let us translate this into your world. Yeah, we are. We spent 30 years building this giant, successfully thing. So yeah, maybe all your people aren't meant to because you're in this small town. You do have a different price point. Who knows what that conversation is, but I think there's so much value of everyone to hear their story, especially if someone can help them translate it. And that's what I think associations can do so brilliantly, get together with like-minded people, find new tribes, because I don't think the tribes that we saw 20 years ago, many of them even exist anymore. So I'm once again at a later age of my career about as excited as I can be about the idea of working in the nonprofit side of our industry. I've always loved groups like PBA. I think, they have a new executive director, Leslie Perry, who's doing amazing things. I'm so excited to see what they'll be doing. I'm excited that to have the opportunity to, I hope, work with her, because I think we're both focused on just how do we raise the industry to the best place it could possibly be. And I think the best way that has always happened and will continue to happen is when hairdressers get together, to help one another. And So
I think
things have changed. You know?
Yeah, I think that's very important what you've just said, actually. That whole thing about you, and you happen to be in the driving seat once again at Intercoiffure. So, definitely.
With a great board.
Good on you.
Actually, I'm actually in the back seat. They're actually in the front seat driving the bus. But I'm the back seat driver saying, "Can we go over there a little bit, please?"
Yeah.
They'll decide.
Okay.
So.
Okay, all right. So listen, we need to wrap up. Where can people connect with you, Gordon? You have a fantastic podcast. You did a series recently, which I want to point everyone towards. It was all about tech, and I think there were 10 different episodes, and you had 12, right? And you had different guest speakers who's had expertise in different areas of tech. I highly recommend that to anyone to have a listen to. Whereabouts should they go to find out more about that, Gordon?
Just go to Google, or go to your AI and ask for the Social Beauty Makers, 3 words, Social Beauty Makers podcast. And it lives on Apple, it lives on Spotify. So that's where you'll find it, and just kind of scroll through the content once you get there, and you'll see all the tech episodes. They happened over several months period.
Yeah, they were really good.
Really enjoyed. I'm relaunching the podcast with a new name in January. It's going to be called Buzz, and I'm going to just kind of refocus, be a little more broad. I didn't do a lot of guests except for those 12 guests, and they excited me so much. I want to bring you back. You've been my number one go-to. You've been on my podcast over the years more than anybody, so I definitely want to get you in early in the year. But I'm going to talk a little bit about trends. I'm going to talk a lot about data and just what is the buzz in the industry. And I want to get the perspective of folks like you who pay attention to what do you see as a buzz. So
good.
Kind of watch for that. I have a newsletter on my website, which is also Social Beauty Makers, socialbeautymakers.com. It's a free newsletter. It gives you links to interesting stuff. And again, I'm at Intercoiffure, intercoiffure.com. Email Gordon at intercoiffure.com.
All right. Okay. Well, listen, I'll put those links in the show notes for today's podcast. So to wrap up, Gordon, thank you ever so much for yet another hour of your time. Lots of great information there to share. I also just want to take the opportunity to wish you a very happy Christmas and thank you for your friendship and contribution throughout the year, not just to me, the wider industry as well. So. And
everybody listening, go experience everything Anthony Whitaker does. He's one of the most brilliant coaches in the industry. He's one of the most brilliant forever business educators in the business. I mean, I just can never say enough good things about what you do, and not because I consider you a friend and a wonderful podcast host. You do important work, and everybody go check it out.
Cool. Thank you, Gordon. Appreciate that.